Good morning, friends. Happy Sabbath. I am the baby Katie that's not so baby anymore. I was driving up from Wawona this morning, and yesterday people asked me, hey, what are you doing on your day off? And I said, I'm actually going to some of my friends' church. And I started telling them about the Pages, and they asked me a very simple question, well, how do you know them? And it stumped me. I genuinely had no idea how I knew the Pages because I don't remember a life without them in it. And so I would say they've become more like family to me. I don't know life without them. From when I was a little kid, I remember watching my mom and Leah run girls' retreat when I was really little. I remember hanging out and watching them do programming and music and a bunch of decorations similar to this, but for girls' retreat. I owe Leah all of my gratitude because I play guitar now because of her. I remember being a little girl and being like, that's who I want to be when I grow up. So I figured I should add a guitar to it to hopefully be a mini Leah. But no, I'm genuinely really, really grateful to be here this morning. Grateful for the impact that you guys have had on my life. And I'm here to testify about that. So I just asked, would you bow your heads with me before we get started this morning? Oh, dear Heavenly Father, Jesus, I'm really, really grateful for Sabbath today. I'm grateful for an opportunity to gather with people who maybe I've never met, and yet because of this love we share for Jesus, I get to walk into your sanctuary this morning and immediately feel at home and feel like I'm with family. I thank you for each and every person that's here this morning. God, I just ask that my story and what you've done in my life this last year, I ask that it would go beyond me, that it would bless in each and every person that has come this morning. And God, I ask that you would give a unique and special message to each person here, including me this morning. So God, bless me and bless the words that I share this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. September 19, 2024, I drove 5 hours to Salt Lake City from my house in Colorado, and I hugged my family for the last time. I duct taped my guitar case about 1,000,000 times, and I headed into the airport for the last time saying goodbye to people with a one-way ticket to Chad, Africa. No, it's not a person. It's actually a country. I would tell people I'm going to Chad for the year, and they'd be like, who's that? It's actually a real country. It does exist. Look it up. It's Central Africa. And I loaded up on the plane. I met up with some friends that I knew who are currently expat long-term surgeons in Chad right now, and I was able to travel to Chad with them. Is this the right button? Perfect. So we loaded into the plane, and I prayed that my luggage would get there, and about 40 hours of travel later, I landed in Chad, Africa in the dark, and immediately I felt the culture shock. When the door opened, all of the humid air hit me. It was dark. There was no walkway tunnel into the airport. It was just right down the steps onto the tarmac, and I felt the culture change dramatically because immediately you could tell in America when you get into an airport, there's hustle, bustle, all of the things, people are traveling. And there was kind of this weird hush, just you knew you were in a different culture. And we stepped out onto the tarmac. Everyone is in their Muslim dress. I was the only one without a head covering on. And I saw all of the Chadian military with their giant guns strapped on front of them in their uniforms. And you knew you had just stepped onto another planet, not just another country. And so we loaded into this bus, crammed in there. I mean, we could not move. And we drove into the airport, and immediately you walk up the stairs, and you walk in, and there's all of the fingerprinting that you have to do. And immediately the first thing that you experience and the first thing that you lose is the ability to communicate with anyone. I stepped up to the person who was taking my fingerprints, and they tried to ask me some questions, and it was all in French. I obviously had no idea what they were asking. I had to ask one of my friends to come over, who I was traveling with, one of the surgeons, and said, "Can you please tell me what they're trying to ask me?" They had a brief conversation, and eventually we were able to pass through. And we stepped down into where we were supposed to get our luggage, and to my shock, unfortunately, my luggage did not make it to Chad. And so now I was stranded in another country, in another world, with no common language with these people, no idea where I was, and I had no clothes, no food, no toothbrush, no anything. And so what do? You don't have a choice. You keep on walking. You say hi to the random cat that's in the airport, which doesn't happen in the States. And you walk outside, and it is so weird. I cannot explain to you the culture shock that happens. If you've done mission trips, you probably have an idea of what it feels like. But we walked out into this parking lot where it was dark, and everyone immediately is trying to get you to buy SD cards from you or anything they can sell to you, random things that looks like they've dumped or dived, but they want you to buy anyways. And I was thinking in my head, like, how are we going to get anywhere? Like, you're kind of just along for the ride. And pretty soon, this chatting Arabic guy comes out in his long dress-looking robe, and apparently he was our driver. He was our taxi guy. And the car that he pulled around the corner, I didn't know could classify as an actual car, because that thing was the oldest beat-up car I've ever seen in my life. If you know anybody who's gone to Chad before, Netterbergs are a family who spent probably 15 years there as the expat surgeons there. And right after I had arrived, they came after me, and they loaded so much luggage onto his car that they broke his axle and had to pay for a new one. But it was crazy. The whole dashboard was not a dashboard. It was these Arabic rugs that were laid over it, because nothing worked, so you may as well cover it up and make it look pretty. And so we jumped in the car, and my year of Chad, Africa began. The culture shock set in, even though I didn't realize it was. If you look back on my visa picture, it is so clear that I am experiencing a new culture, whether I realized it or not. Fast forward, that was landing in the capital of Chad. So you fly into the capital of Chad, which is N'Djamena, and then to get to Bere, which is where I was, where the little tiny Adventist hospital was, it was a whole nother day's trip. So we spent probably a week in the capital, because we had to do all of our paperwork, had to get a longer-term visa, we had to get our phones working. All of the to-do list, we had to shop for food, because you can't even buy salt in Bere, where I was living. So anything you wanted that was packaged, we had to buy in N'Djamena and bring it down with us. And so fast forward, to get down to Bere, we took a 10-hour bus ride on bumpy dirt roads. And then after that, we got off and we strapped all of our suitcases onto motorcycles. That I come from a family that rides motorcycles, and these were the worst motorcycles I've ever ridden in my life. I showed up in rainy season, which means that all of the roads were flooded. So we were like up to here on the motos, like from here down, I was in water while we were trying not to fall over on motos, with about 3 suitcases loaded on and 2 or 3 people on each moto. So it was a pretty adventurous time getting from the capital to Bere, and that was probably a 2-hour moto ride. So you're a full day's travel just to get from the capital to the little village that I was at for the year. But it was really cool once I landed in the village, because you sort of are away from any fast pace of life. It is village life. There are brick, mud, straw huts everywhere. There's a couple motos around. There's carts, and there's ox, and there's every farm animal you can imagine is in the road at every compound. It is just a totally different life there. But like I said, one of the first things I noticed or felt when I got to Chad was the loss of communication. All ability to communicate or talk to people was immediately taken away from me. The whole time I was there, I met probably 2 local people who spoke English. Everyone's second language is French. But even beyond that, the only people who know French is educated people, which a lot of times is only the men. Occasionally, most of our hospital staff will speak good French. But if none of the kids spoke French, and most of the time the moms were at home and never went to school, so they don't speak French as well. That means there are hundreds of tribal dialects in Chad, hundreds and hundreds of tribal dialects. Each one of our staff, local staff that worked at the hospital, spoke probably an average of 9 or 10 languages to be able to translate. So my journey with language began from day one. I showed up knowing no French. And so I showed up and I started to learn French from whoever would teach me. But it was really slow going, and I really felt that disconnect. I had come to Chad to serve, you get sent out with the missionary spirit of like, I'm going to help, I'm going to serve. And you get there and you realize you can't even say hello to these people. And it's a really, really interesting journey that I walked. I was really, really overwhelmed with the idea of trying to connect with people. I'm a pastor's kid. Connecting with people was something I grew up doing. I knew how to make friends. I was outgoing. I don't consider myself necessarily an extrovert because I like my introvert time. But connecting was never a really, really big struggle for me. But when I got to Chad, it was so overwhelming. I was 2 languages removed from any person that I met. I was obviously in a completely different culture that I didn't understand, and it felt really, really overwhelming. I felt like during this time, God started to teach me that there is more than just the classic languages that you know. There's French, there's all of those tribal languages, there's English, there's Spanish, there's a million languages, but the language I didn't know about that I felt like God started to teach me was the language of humanity. I realized that there is a language of humanity that translates through all languages and all cultures. Are you ready to know what they are? What the language of humanity is? It's laughing, it's crying, it's smiling, it's grieving, it's dancing, and it's loving. I was stripped from all language except for that. All I had was the language of humanity now, and so I learned to use it because I didn't have any other choice. There are 3 little kids that specifically taught me the language of humanity. Their names are Kura, Kuma, and Ozias. Here on the screen, this is Kura. This is actually when I said bye to her, which was one of the hardest things ever. But I'll tell you, I showed up to this tiny little village church. So they speak Nandere, which is their tribal language. They don't speak French. The oldest, Kuma, is probably about 12, and she knew a bit of French, but it was really rough when I knew a bit of French and she knew a bit of French, and that was about it. And her little brother, Ozias, would have breakdowns, and he's full-on toddler age, and I was trying to speak to Kuma, who spoke a little bit of French, and she was trying to translate into Nandere, and so every conversation was really, really difficult. But before I really knew them, I showed up to church, which is like dogs and cattle's walk through church, dirt, floors, kids go to the bathroom in the back of the church. It's just another world. It is nothing like church in the States. And I showed up to Sabbath school, and there's all these naked little kids that show up to church, and we would sing. My first thing I did was learn about 5 songs in Nandere and French on my guitar. And so we would do church with these kiddos. And I met Kura and Ozi and Kuma, and I didn't even know their names because I didn't know how to ask them what their name was. But I will never forget this moment early on. I sort of, for whatever reason, Kura, this little girl, latched onto me, and I was holding her in church, one of my early times to the church, and I was listening to the sermon in French, trying to translate with everything I had and understand what they were talking about. And before you know it, I looked down, and I realized that Kura had fallen asleep on my lap. And it hit me really hard because I could not understand how in the world she knew that she was safe. Like, how did she know to trust me? We had not said a single word to each other in the same language, and I had no idea why or how she had been able to tell that she was safe and that she could fall asleep. And it later dawned on me that it was the language of humanity. The language of humanity translates in every culture. You can take it anywhere in the world, and if you're willing to cry with people, to laugh with people, to dance with people, to grieve with people, I promise you, you will connect with people. That sounds pretty and all, right? But I'm still 3 months in, and I can't talk to anybody. And one morning, I was really, really frustrated. Oh, I think I have a couple more pictures. This is all three of them. This is Kuma, the older one. This is Ozias, the little brother, and that's Kura. And they're all orphans and live on their grandfather's compound, who is not the nicest man, and yet, obviously, he's still involved in the church, and nobody really knows about it. But yeah, these kids changed my life forever. They sort of became my kids. They came over to my house all the time. I've showered them, fed them, and anything you can imagine, sort of adopted them. But yeah, super cool. Anyways, I still can't talk to anybody. And one morning, I'm like really defeated. I am sitting at my table, and it's really overwhelming trying to go work in the hospital because I'm an undergrad student. I had done 2 years at Southern, and I still had no idea how to talk to these people. And I thought, man, God, I don't know how to connect with these people. You've got to give me something. Like, I need to know. Like, you got to give me the gift of tongues or something now. And I found myself in the story of the woman of the well that morning in my devotions. And I grew up in church. I had heard the story many times. But for whatever reason that morning, I just felt like God had me read it through again. And this is the classic story in the Bible. I'm sure you know it, where Jesus goes out of his way and he does the impossible of connecting across cultures, connecting through barriers. He connects with this woman at the well who really culturally he shouldn't even be talking to. And I remember reading through that story, and I remember Jesus just asking me and saying, Katie, how did I connect with her? Like, how did I break down those cultural barriers? What did I do? And I just felt my response to God, my honest response was, you asked for help. You asked for her to serve you. You were humble enough to ask for her to give you a drink of water. And that was a really big changing moment for me, because that next moment I got up and I went into the hospital. This is our surgery ward. There's more beds, but it's really fancy. Can you tell? No, it's not. If you can see through the door, there's someone camping on a mat out there. That's where most of the patients will end up staying on the sidewalk of the hospital building. I mean, it is crazy. I wish I could explain it better. But I walked into the hospital and I started asking for help. There was a guy named Gopina who would help me. I started asking him what questions, like, how do I say this in French? My French got to a point where I could ask questions, and I would ask what the names of the instruments were in French, and I would ask them to teach me. And it was a really big turning point for me, because I realized you connect with people by learning from them. I wasn't here to teach them. I was there to learn from them. And it changed everything. I started being able to work in the OR. That is me on the right, and that's one of the ladies who runs the hospital, actually. She's an incredible family medicine doc, and really learned a lot from her. But I realized that being willing to be served, being willing to learn from people, was a really big deal. Speaking the language of humanity and learning from people breaks down barriers in seconds. And I found myself being able to connect with people, making friends, and was really blessed by the journey that God was taking me on. I brought something with me. Before I went to Chad, I was at Southern, and I did 2 years at Southern before I went to Chad. And I will tell you that I grew up in Colorado and Northern California. Gorgeous places to live. Then I landed in Tennessee and was like, where are the mountains? Come to find out, there's not very many mountains, but there is climbing in in Southern. And there's really cool little like nooks and crannies where you can go climb. And it's really world-class climbing that you would have no idea or think would be there, but there is. And I'm grateful because I started to make friends that climbed. I got into climbing. It was super fun. And thankfully, my love for climbing lasted longer than my classic freshman year of college relationship. But I love climbing still to this day. And I brought here, there's 3 types of climbing, in case you're unfamiliar with it. There is I'll start with bouldering. There's bouldering, which you don't use a harness or anything. It's just shoes, chalk, and it's usually a boulder. And you have some crash pads under you, which is just like fancy gymnastic mats, basically. I'm not a huge fan of bouldering because there's nothing that catches you except your friends as you hit the crash pad. But there's bouldering. And then there's sport climbing, which is when the bolts are bolted into the wall already. And you basically have little things that you can clip onto a rope and that are clipped onto the bolt in the wall and then onto the rope that's attached to you. And so I do a lot of sport climbing. I love it. It's super fun because you have gear that's already placed in the wall for you. You know it's not going to come out. It's really nice. But there's a 3rd type of climbing, and that's trad climbing. Trad stands for traditional because it's been around for the longest. And this right here is a trad rack. I don't know if you can see it. I'll hold it up for you. There's a lot of types of gear on here, but I want to show you 2 main types of gear. This right here is what you call a cam, right here, if you can see it. So I'm working in Yosemite at Wawona, and there's epic crack climbing in Yosemite. And these are used for cracks a lot of the times. You'll find a little crack that you can pinch it, slide into the crack, and then release. And then basically you clip right here to your rope. And you pray that when you fall, that stays in the crack and it catches you and saves your life from falling all the way down off the cliff. But here's the crazy part. There's another piece of gear that you use in trad climbing, and this is called a nut piece right here. Do you see how tiny that is? Super tiny. This is also used to do the same thing that the cam does, except that it's a lot scarier looking to trust your life on. A lot of times there's really small pieces in the rock, and you can hook into the rock on the wall and then basically do the same thing. You clip onto your rope and you clip into the end of that nut piece right here into this carabiner. And I will tell you that climbing has taught me that the small things matter. Tying your knots right matter. Small pieces of gear matter because even though you may look at that rack and think, oh, I would never use those, like I'd just stick with the cams. Well, you're going to experience pieces of rock where trying to use a cam will ultimately be more dangerous than trusting the smaller piece of gear. So before I went to Chad, I thought that climbing had taught me everything I needed to know about the fact that small things matter. I was wrong. I got to Chad and I learned that the small things matter in a whole different new way. I want to tell you about 2 patients specifically. I don't have a picture of this one patient because in Chad, they're really camera shy, and so you don't take a lot of pictures. But early on in my experience at Chad, I told you that people stay on the sidewalks next to the buildings. They basically they have these mats they sleep on. If they have enough money, they'll have a mosquito net because there's a lot of malaria there. But most of the time they don't. It's just a mat on the sidewalk. And when you read the Bible about sick and dying people in a dirt courtyard, that's what I was living. And specifically one day I kept walking past this one patient that was a younger mom with 2 kids and her mom there. So it was grandma, mom, and 2 kids. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I kind of just kept saying hi to these kids. I'd walk by on my way to work, and come to find out, I started asking some of the docs, like, hey, what's her story? You know, what does she have? come to find out, she had everything you can imagine. She had malaria. She had really, really severe syphilis. And something about syphilis is that if you have it really severe and you don't have medication for it, it slowly paralyzes you. So I remember watching her as the weeks went on start to lose more and more mobility. She went from sitting up, playing with her kids. Her mom would be there sort of making food for them because there's no food service at our hospital. Your family is your caregiver. And it's really tough when you don't have a lot of family. But I remember watching her just slowly lose more and more mobility. She went from sitting up to not really getting up at all to laying down. And pretty soon she just really, really was sick. And eventually her mom and her kids were there less and less because, the kids, they get bored. They can't live, with their mom who can't provide for them anymore. And so eventually it was just her that was laying on that mat there, unable to move, unable to do anything for herself, and without the care that she needed. And one day I walked past her little mat on the sidewalk, and I realized she wasn't there. And so I was like, man, where's Adele? That was her name. And I walked into the medicine ward, and I found her in the section of the medicine ward. There's no lights in there. It's dark. And she was on a little mat. We have these, the beds I showed you? We have those beds, but a lot of the times they're not used to being above the ground when they sleep, so they just set up mats on the floor in the ward. And I found her on a mat on the floor in the medicine ward, and she looked so terrible. I felt so bad for her. No one was there caring for her, and so I told my fellow SM, I said, hey, we're not docs, we're not surgeons right now, we can't save her life, but what if we just get a bucket of soap and water and we go bathe her? Because she hasn't had that in probably 6 months. There's no showers in Chad, you bucket wash. And so we were like, okay, sweet, this should be easy enough. Grab a rag, grab a bucket. There's no rags in Chad. We were like digging through our suitcases trying to find old t-shirts we could use. And soap is even for rich people in Chad. And so we bought soap, we got water, and it's not cold, or it's not warm, obviously, because there's no hot water in Chad. And we took it over to her bed, and we got the opportunity to sponge bathe her. It sounds really pretty, but it was disgusting. I mean, she hasn't bathed in 6 months. She hasn't been able to move. There's waste. It is the dirty work of a rural hospital in Chad, Africa. And I got the opportunity to do that for her. And the next day she passed away. But I will tell you that I got to do insane stuff in Chad. Like, you can see this picture. I got to operate. I delivered babies. I mean, stuff that med students would just, pay to do. And for me, this patient, Adele, sticks with me the most. That moment where I got to simply kneel down in the dirt and put gloves on and wipe her off and bathe her. I learned that the small moments matter. I learned that small moment mattered for her, that moment that seemed so little, that didn't save her life, ultimately may have saved her life because she experienced love and care in her last moments. So I learned that the small moments matter. There's another patient that I want to tell you about, and she taught me that small babies matter, that small amounts of food matter. This is baby Katie. I was honored to have a little baby named after me. Her mom was 17 when she came into the hospital. There's a lot of young brides in Chad, and the dad of the baby was out of the picture, and the 17-year-old mom had a young mom as well, so she didn't have much support, and she showed up at the hospital. And she was born at 1.5 kilograms, which is about 3.31 pounds. None of the preemies survive in the ward there because the local nurses don't have skill or knowledge to be able to save preemies. We don't have, my older sister is a NICU nurse in the States, and we have none of the supplies or resources that they have in the States. And so obviously preemies have a really, really difficult time surviving in Chad. And so one day we walked through the ward and we saw this baby and she was not doing well. We knew she had a lot of infections. She had malaria. She wasn't eating. She didn't have enough strength to breastfeed. And so she was still satting really low as well. So we put her on oxygen, put an NG tube in, and that began feedings every 3 hours for about 3 months. And so me on the left there, that's me at about 3 a.m. in the hospital, feeding her via her NG tube through her nose and making sure that she was still satting fine and had a temperature because it was so hot. It was so hot in Chad. You would sweat at 3 a.m. in the morning. It was just average of 110 degrees. It was insane. But she taught me that small things make a big difference. She would get about 30, we started with about 30 milliliters of milk each feed, which is like this much in a little tiny syringe. Hardly anything. When you look at it, you think that's not going to make a big difference. But it did. And 3 hours, she gained, you can see she started gaining weight. And that's her mom on the left right there. That's where they would stay. She started to get some rolls, which was so exciting. And it was so, so fun to watch her grow. And I was just so honored to be a part of her story. And her mom spoke some French, but she also spoke Nandre was her main language. And it was just really, really cool to have a success story. She went home about a week after I left and was discharged about double her birth weight. She went through she had malaria 2 times before she left the hospital, was on a lot of antibiotics, and a lot of work went into this little baby to save her. We basically created a NICU out of our living room. But yeah, small things matter. Small amounts of milk brought big growth for baby Katie, and ultimately another life is in the world because of it, which is really, really cool. As you know, I'm working at Camp Wawona this summer. Whoop, whoop. Little shameless plug for Camp Wawona. We have 170 campers signed up for camp right now, which is really awesome. We have 35 staff up there right now. We just hired 3 more boys counselors because we were like, we have so many kids coming, we need more counselors. So we hired more. They're driving up tomorrow. Kids arrive, and I'm really, really excited about it. Camp ministry has been a part of my life for a really long time. I worked at Big Lake last summer specifically, and I had one cabin that was, oh my goodness. If you've ever worked summer camp before, you know that sometimes you have cabins that are just the most angel kids ever. Everything's great. Everyone gets along. And then you have other weeks that are not quite like that. And last summer, I had one cabin that was probably the hardest cabin I've ever had in my life. In one day, I filled out 14 incident reports. And those were not just injuries, those were fighting. It was everything you can imagine. I don't think I ate anything that week. I don't think I slept. Every bedtime trick you can imagine I tried. Played my guitar, read stories. We did everything, and still no one would sleep. Everyone would fight. It felt like I was just surviving the week, And most time people talk about, man, the power of summer camp. And that week I was just thinking, I just need to keep these kids alive. We need to survive and get to the end of this week. It didn't feel like I had any of those big God moments that everyone talks about. I didn't have any of those incredible holy ground conversations with any of the kids. It was just doing hair, brushing teeth, getting them to breakfast in the morning, a bunch of small little things. But when I got to the end of that week, this little girl, Rosie, came up to me, and she said, "Hey, Miss Katie, will you baptize me?" And I was like, "Can you repeat that again? Are you for sure? Are you the kid? Are you sure? Were you actually here this week? Because this was an insane week." And she said, "No, yeah, I want to get baptized at the end of the week." And it really impacted me. Rosie has left an imprint on my heart because she taught me that the small things matter too. Little did I know, even though brushing knotted hair for 2 hours in the morning didn't feel like a big God moment, it was. All of those small little things added up to make a big difference. I talked about climbing earlier. If you go to a climbing gym, there's 2 types of people that climb. If you've ever been to a climbing gym, there's always that one big like macho dude that's like, he's the boulderer, you know, like he shows up, he always picks the route that has the least amount of pieces on the wall. Like he's the one that's upside down, trying to give all of the butterfly moves, trying to make everybody know that he can climb, you know, like he does not do any small moves. It's all big moves, you know, like we are making big moves. We're either landing them or we're on the mat, you know, there's that guy. And then there's the other type of climber that you don't really notice when you first come into the gym, because it almost looks like he's just dancing up the wall, you know? Like, I climbed at a gym in Chico, California, and there was this one girl that came in. I swear to you, it looked like she was just flying up the wall. Like, it was just this little delicate move, like foot here, hand here, heel hook. And what do you know? She is sending the hardest moves like it's nothing. And she didn't do any big, massive move. It was just like all of a sudden, pretty soon, she was there. And that made a big impact on me too, because I realized that a lot of times God uses those small little moves to get you to the top. I didn't experience I experienced insane things in Chad, but in the moment, they just felt like small little moves. They felt like foot here, hand here, heel hook. And pretty soon I was just like, whoa, how did I end up here? Like, how did I get here, God? And I remember him telling me, just Katie, it's because you've leaned into the small moments. It's because I've given you small moments that have stacked up. And now you're here and it's insane. Yeah, it's insane. There's a story in the Bible that if you want to, you can flip to it. It's Mark 5, and it's the story of the woman who touched Jesus' hem. And this story has been special to me for a really long time. But specifically, this morning, I hope you see the importance of a small touch. There was a lot of people in that crowd. There was a lot going on. And when Jesus asked his disciples, like, they're on their way, they've got an agenda, they're going to accomplish things, they're going to heal all these people, we got to get to this place, we got to go, Jesus, we got to go, everyone's crowded around. Summer camp feels a lot like that. We are just running at Mach 12 trying to get everything ready. And yet Jesus all of a sudden is just like, ask the dumbest question you can imagine. It's like, hey, who touched me? And all of his disciples are like, Jesus, are you crazy? Because there are so many people here bumping into you. But he felt that one touch of faith. And this has been really important to me over the years, because I don't want to ever be all of those crowd members that bumped into Jesus a million times and never received any power, never received any healing, never experienced a conversation or relationship with Jesus, because they weren't looking for the small touch. They were going for the big moves. They were trying to get Jesus' attention. They were on an agenda, and they missed that small touch. They missed the small moves that get you to the top. What's the top? It's being in the dirt with Jesus, actually. For me, I felt like going to Chad, Africa, and being willing to do the small things ultimately got me to the top, which was kneeling in the dirt. After I left Chad, I was able to stop by France, and we got to go through some of the giant cathedrals, and I remember walking out just thinking, wow, I'm so grateful for the God that I know, because I know I was kneeling in the dirt, taking out Foley's and doing dressing changes with God last week. And when I went to France and saw these giant cathedrals that portray, they're beautiful, but they portray God as being really hard to get to, like top of the ceiling. You got to do all your prayers right to get to God. And I walked away being So, so, so grateful for the God that I knew, the God that I knew I got to serve with in Chad, the God that I knew that wasn't afraid of kneeling in the dirt, that wasn't afraid of wiping off just absolutely disgusting things off of patients, and the God who wasn't afraid to live with, to laugh with, to dance with, to speak the language of humanity. The small things matter to Jesus. That small touch mattered to Jesus because it opened up the pathway for his Spirit to show up in a big way. Ultimately, those small moments, those small moves, they allow you to beat the big macho guy by 1,000 times. If you lean into those small moments, the small moves, if you see the significance in them, if you let God use those, if you let him stack them up for you in your life, I promise you that you will get to the end and you will realize that God is a God who has been there in the dirt with you every step of the way. I'm going to be raw with you. Are you ready for this? There's a lot of missionaries that go out and come back with a really beautiful conclusion from their time there. They end it, this is about the time I should be wrapping up with a pretty bow that says, this was amazing, God's good, the world's a great place. I can't do that this morning. I can't do that. I don't have a beautiful, happy conclusion for my time in Chad because there isn't a conclusion. I wrestled with that a lot as I was preparing to leave Chad because I still have friends there. I actually just talked to some of, not a lot of them have WhatsApp or ability to call outside of the country, but probably about 2 or 3 of them do. Got to say hi to some of my orphan kiddo friends and talk to Mister, who's a nurse and taught me French when I was out there. But the suffering's still happening. The effect that Chad has on my life is still happening. I just made the call to my advisor to switch my major, and I'm going to head to med school, hopefully, by the will of God. But that increases my journey by a lot. I sign up for a really long journey. But you get it? There's no conclusion. There's no conclusion to it because the world's not over yet, even if it feels like it's going to end soon. There's people that need love. There's people that need others that are willing to lean into the small moments. I don't have a beautiful conclusion for you, except that I have learned the value of leaning into the language of humanity and not missing the small moments. There's people in Chad that will affect me for the rest of my life. There's stories I couldn't tell today because they're just too raw. And yeah, those are for maybe one day in heaven. But I just hope that as you walk out this morning, you remember the power of the language of humanity and not missing the small moments. That you would look for God in the small things, that you would laugh with people, that you would cry with people, that you would grieve with people, and that you would not be afraid to kneel down in the dirt because God wasn't. Jesus showed me he isn't just the God of the cathedral. He's the God that actually kneels down in the dirt, that's willing to embrace the small moments, the small steps, because ultimately the end goal is to all be on our knees, worshiping, loving together. And yeah, Chad taught me that. I want to end with this. Whew. There's a girl named Jermaine that I met, and she, oh my goodness, she has so much energy. It's like she just bounces everywhere she goes. But you never know the story behind her. She lives with an abusive husband that has done some pretty crazy things, and I don't know how she doesn't just live in fear 24/7. She dealt with serious demon possession for a while, learned the power of God, and has been able to take control of her life again, which is really cool. She now worked for us and continues to work for us on the compound, basically just cleaning and all of everything. She does laundry. She's just an incredible girl. She's an incredible friend. She makes peanut butter for us and all of that. But when I was getting ready to leave, she came into my room and we knelt down on the floor together, and she looked at me and she said, Katie, I don't have anything to give you. It was in French, obviously. It was all in French. But she said, I don't have anything to give you. She says, but I can give you Jesus. And oh my goodness, I will never forget that moment, because we knelt down and prayed, and a year later I understood French. I was able to talk to these people, and you may not feel like you have much to give. I know the woman that touched Jesus didn't feel like she had much to give. I know the woman that felt like she had nothing to give. I know I felt like I had nothing to give when I went to Chad. But in reality, like, you have the most precious thing to give to people. You have Jesus. And for me, I felt like I was going to Chad in the beginning to give to people. And then I learned I needed to just learn from them. And I needed to receive Jesus from them. And so, there's no one big conclusion other than the fact that the language of humanity is really, really powerful. And leaning into the small moments is a big deal. And even if you don't feel like you have anything to give, I promise you, you do. You have Jesus. There's nobody poorer than Jermaine. There's nobody poorer than Jermaine. But she gave me everything I could ever need. And you have that too. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for Chad. Thank you for the impact that it had on my life. But most importantly, thank you for the kind of God that you are. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for a Jesus who's willing to kneel in the dirt, who's willing to go to the far corners of the earth, who is willing to connect with each and every person, who's in it for the long haul. You're not just about fast results or big moves. You're not the guy in the gym who's just trying to send every big route. God, you are the Jesus that's willing to feel the small touch, to kneel down and ride in the dirt. God, you're willing to take every small, dirty child on your lap. And I've seen some really dirty kids, and I'm pretty sure those are the ones you held on your lap. And so, God, I just ask that you would teach us to speak the language of humanity more often. That we would slow down enough to lean into being present in those small moments and speaking the language of humanity, which a lot of times is just actions. God, that you would teach us to laugh with each other, that you would teach us to cry with each other, that you would teach us to grieve with each other, that you would teach us to dance with joy together, and that ultimately, God, you would teach us to love deeper and in a new way. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.